Okay, let's take a look at the sagittal brain on our head model here, okay? And this mimics many of the brain models that we actually have in lab, although, of course, you're not going to be able to see external structures from this view. So right off the bat, you see all the gyri and sulci of the cerebrum, okay? Now what you have here, this white structure, this big comma-shaped structure there, that's your corpus callosum. Those are commissural fibers that connect the right and left hemisphere. Now right underneath there you see a smaller white structure that parallels the larger corpus callosum. That there is your fornix, okay? And then what you find between the corpus callosum and the fornix, on this model it's like a fleshy color, that is your septum pellucidum, okay? The septum pellucidum. That's going to separate your two left ventricles from each other. Now, this area right here, this fleshy colored kind of bump there, that area is the thalamus, okay? And right in the center of the thalamus, you might see that you have this kind of brownish circle. And that's like a little cross-section of a little stalk that holds the right and left thalamus together. We refer to this little brown dot here as the interthalamic adhesion, or you'll see it also called the intermediate mass, okay? Now, below the thalamus, as the name would indicate, is your hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus kind of presents like a little W shape here, okay? Sitting just anterior and inferior to the thalamus. Now, off of the hypothalamus, from this W shape here, you have a little tiny stalk that comes down into this pea-sized structure right here. You see the front part is a brown color, the white part is a white color. That's your pituitary gland, or what we would call your hypophysis cerebri. The anterior portion is adenohypophysis, the posterior portion is the neurohypophysis. And then connecting the neurohypophysis to the hypothalamus is that little stalk called your infundibulum. Okay? Now the bump that's anterior to the pituitary gland, right here, that is your optic chiasm. Okay? That allows for the crossover of some nerve fibers from your right and left optic nerve. Posterior to the pituitary gland, if we go back here, you see a structure called the mammillary body. Okay? Humans have two mammillary bodies. Of course, we're looking at cross-section, so we just see one. So we find our pituitary gland, anterior to that, optic chiasm, back to the pituitary, posterior to that, your mammillary body. Okay? Now, from a cavity or a space standpoint, you can see the third ventricle, you can see the fourth ventricle quite easily on this model. Now remember, the ventricle is a space. So your third ventricle then is really all of this space around the area of the diencephalon. Remember, the diencephalon is anything with thalamus in the name. So the solid structure is my thalamus. In front of that, my W is my hypothalamus. Structure we haven't found yet, off the posterior aspect here, is your epithalamus, or what's often referred to as the pineal gland or pineal body. So each of these structures has a name, but the space that's found around all of those structures, that space would be referred to as the third ventricle. And now this kind of little purpley structure right there, that's supposed to be showing you an example of the choroid plexus, which of course is where some cerebrospinal fluid actually comes from. Okay? So once I know this area then is my third ventricle, I can follow this passageway, and this passageway there is the cerebral aqueduct, or we call it the aqueduct of Sylvius, and then the cerebral aqueduct opens up into the fourth ventricle. And right here you see the fourth ventricle between this area, which is the cerebellum, to the posterior, and then anterior to the fourth ventricle is your pons and your medulla. Okay? Now your medulla, your pons, and then this area right in here, your midbrain, those are the three components of your brainstem. Okay? Now, in the area of the midbrain, we see these two little bumps. On this model, because we're in cross-section, we only see one set. The top bump, we call that the superior colliculus. The bottom bump, we call that the inferior colliculus. So, of course, we have rights and lefts. So we have a pair of superior colliculi, we have a pair of inferior colliculi. Together, those four structures are called the corpora quadrigemina, okay? The body of four. Back here again to the cerebellum, we find the white matter that's deep within the hemispheres of the cerebellum. That white matter is referred to as the arbor vitae. Okay? And I believe that's about all we can see in this brain model. Real quick overview. We have the corpus callosum, the fornix, the septum pellucidum. I have my pituitary gland, adeno and neural hypophysis with my infundibulum. That connects to this W area, which is my hypothalamus. Anterior to the pituitary gland, that's my optic chiasm. Posterior to the pituitary gland, that's my mammillary body. This kind of raised round region is my thalamus. The little spot in the center is my interthalamic adhesion or my intermediate mass. This whole area here, the hollow portion, is my third ventricle. On top of my third ventricle, I have some choroid plexus. My pineal body, or my pineal gland, or my epithalamus lies posterior to that third ventricle. My superior colliculus, my inferior colliculus, my pons. I've got my medulla oblongata, and then posterior to the pons and medulla, I have my fourth ventricle. Connecting my third to the fourth ventricle is my cerebral aqueduct. I've got my cerebellum, with the white matter being my arbor vitae. And there's the sagittal brain on this head model.